There was a little something from the last time that we were taping. We sort of ran out of time, and I let drop that I'm going back to. And that was that there was a Kyroot that was more or less that said a man with a soul has no mind. And I mentioned it, but I've got to go back. It is not just words, and it's not just psychological. It is actually into the nervous system physically of man, and the only way it can manifest itself through a thinking creature such as man is no longer just fisticuffs or anything just physical. Somatic has got to come out in what seems to be psychological, verbal, intellectual ways. And what little I had touched on, I just want to pick back up because it is right at the heart of all of this. The little bit that we hit last time, I was mentioning, normally you're talking about the religious when they're talking about soul. And as all of you know by now, in TV land, if you've seen more than once or twice, you should be able to feel that it's not in any way an attack on religion. It's just that religion has been one of the most widespread, observable, which seems to be cultural, civilized, institutionalized manifestations of man's progress beyond the primary level. And it still hangs about. So it's in that area that you normally hear people talk about soul. They call it some things in other religions, but anyway, here in the West, they call it soul. And the Kyroot says that a man with a soul has no mind. Now, we could say that a man, those who believe they have a soul generally have no mind. Of course, even that is not subtle enough, it's not gradual enough, because it's not absolutely true. But do note that the more you get into an area, geographically speaking, chronologically speaking, psychologically speaking, of moving further away from the feral primary world of man, inside your own nervous system, into the psychological, intellectual, the more you have people who will naysay, or as they say in physics, badmouth religion. But religion is always referring to the soul as being the crowning glory of man, the highest possible achievement of man, the paramount expression of a man's life, his individuality, anything he might achieve, they call it his soul. And then it goes in, as all of you know, into variations having to do with the various cults and denominations. But they speak, in many of the religions, will speak of a soul and an intellect. And some of them, if they do, they'll even get into describing a battle between a man's soul and a man's intellect. And the more that they are into that version of soul, the more they see the intellect as being a carnal, a three-dimensional foe of the soul, because they'll say, well, if you get too smart, you're inclined to lose your religion. That's kind of a down-home version, but you can find it all the way from Bubba Girder. You can find it throughout history, the version of that. As soon as men, which we're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 years that you know of, that we're talking about men beginning to become philosophers, beginning to speak from the head, trying to remove themselves inside their own nervous system. It's not an individual achievement, but trying to distance themselves from the ordinary fears and rattlings down in the basement of the nervous system, down in the primary world, the nonverbal pit. Of course, then they begin to imagine, wait a minute, I am related to Dante, and I know what's going to happen. The pit comes later. No, see, that's what happens when you think sequential. They think, well, you're going to die and go to the pit. You already came out of the pit. Of course, some of you are still kind of flowing up. I can see in the elevator shaft, just trying to get up to the first floor, or even the mezzanine, just the sub-basement. But what I wanted to say, if you look at the view, let's take soul and the intellect, the mind, and I used it very crudely because it made a short sentence that men with a soul have no mind. And as always, if anyone is alive and functioning, it is never that clear cut. We're talking about the great science fiction continuum. Hasn't science fiction finally worn it out? But at any rate, it's the gradual spectrum from being feral, primary, nonverbal, bricklaying attorney, into some kind of civilized, decent, secondary person. And it would represent the soul down here, those, and then the mind. And so there appears to be this continual battle that gets more and more dilemmed between what seems to be intellectuals saying, well, fully owned religion, it is anachronistic, it is getting us nowhere, and it is only the uneducated. And of course the uneducated are the ones who, from their view, are the ones who still uphold the banner saying, well, you can get too smart for your own good. I remember Hubert and Gladys' son was a nice, decent boy, went to the Assembly of God or to a Baptist church. By God, they sent him off to state college, and he came back, and he said, I don't believe in God. And even if I do, I ain't going to pay him 10% of my salary now that I got a good job. And so there seems to be this continual battle between those who say the most important thing is a man's soul, and in some way you can lose some of the efficacy, some of the beauty, some of the importance of your soul if you lend too much weight, if you give too much attention to your mind. It is so common, the reason I bring it up, under all sorts of guises, and I could talk about it for a long, long time, figuring out the other examples, but you can see it in everything from television shows to literature, all forms of culture, is there seems to be this, what is represented by the Kyroot of a man with a soul has no mind. And those who believe that they, at the ordinary street level, are intellectual are the ones that say we don't need a soul. And they could hear this and say, well, you're correct, and that's a good thing to point out, because men should quit worrying about a damn soul. We don't have a soul. We can't find a soul. They've been cutting up people now legally, doing those autopsies, for 100 years. And they never found a man's soul. It's just old ignorant people. Well, in fact, ignorant, which is really bad. It's just old ignorant people that believe in a soul. You are stealing from the potential of the human mind to believe in such claptrap. I went through all that to try to get you to see that there is always the indivisible flow of energy in you and all men, but in you, to where you can feel. You should be able to feel and to think about the reality of the Kyroot that said, a man with a soul has no mind. It is a gradual flow of energy in you and in humanity, but if you ain't good at this, if you should be involved with this, you are like a very shortcut version of the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, whether you thought about it that way. I mean really shortcut. You should have it down by now to maybe an hour. Is why I've tried to hold these talks down to an hour at best. But you should be able to do that. It is not one or the other. And yet, once you see that there is a valid description of saying that's the way man operates, then you can see it's almost as though, if you remember the diagram I used to draw of the human nervous system, if you thought about the mind up here, the secondary world, and then down here at the base of your spine, down in your guts, and the somatic, crude, baser parts of man, and you thought about that as being the primary level, the hippo, the beaver, the bricklaying level. Then down here is where you're thinking about a soul, and up here is where they're thinking about a mind. And simply due to, of course it's too late now, we can't do anything about it, since he died and got away, people like Newton, one of them is going to operate at the expense of the other one. To varying degrees, not exclusively. It only appears to be exclusively to those in the 3D world limited to 2D sight. That is, ordinary thinkers. They're the ones that say, well, you got your choice. You can either be a Christian, or whatever you call it, a Orthodox Muslim, an Orthodox Jew, or you can be a goddamn intellectual, some smart-ass atheist, but you can't do both, and you might as well straighten up and face it. Life is not like that, of course, and the ordinary can't see it. I mean, they can see it, but they can't see the purpose. They can say, well, it's not so. And you say, well, how do you face the fact that you are a X and that they're anti-X people? And you say you can't have it both ways. What are they doing here? And then all you can do is fall back into, well, you're right, they're here, but they're anomalies. They shouldn't be here. The sooner we're rid of them, the better. It's not one or the other. And yet what appears to be the kinds of things that fuel the growth of civilization, people dancing, cultural phenomenon of all sorts, is based back upon the very simple, I didn't count the words, a man with a soul has no mind. That's what it amounts to ordinary thinking. no matter what words they use. You see what it does? Once you realize that without any, although I made up the description, that the three-dimensional world, the world as you know it, is run on polarized energy. No matter what the extremes seem to be, no matter what the charges of plus or minus or up or down seem to be, that's what runs everything. And once you see that, then you see that what seems to be right at the heart of understanding humans, according to ordinary views, it is down to a man with a soul has no mind. Because no matter what they call it, the ordinary intellect takes it as being either or, one or the other. In fact, they will, if pushed, all religions have some little area where they say that there's a place worse than your routine hell. It's where you're uncertain. You're going to end up having to live throughout eternity with John Milton, or it's worse than just being cast in a lake of fire. It's being cast in a lake of fire full of literary critics and metaphysical poets. Out of all of that, it's inside of you, and it is, I started to say my original threat, but I don't guess I'll do it. You can almost understand it. I was almost tempted to try and describe some of it. That physically is what's going on. There is a physical need, and we just put words on it. Such things as soul, such things as mind. And it is a flow of energy in you constantly. And if you get real good, not weird, good, you can almost feel it. Oh, don't worry about feeling it then, or some of you think, Jesus, I'm getting some kind of nervous system heebie-jeebies. There's a part that cries out that I'm your soul. And then you get a little bit better, and it says, well, I want to be your soul. And then there's a weaker part, it seems weaker to almost everybody to start with, the part that says, I'd like to be your mind. Because the older part is the one that's trying to say, I want to be your soul. And by being older, it's just like being a bigger, older brother, it carries more clout. And so the part that starts out that I'd like to be your mind seems as though it is some kind of usurper. It seems like it is trying to get pushed there. Now, wait a minute. We've had thousands of years, even though you don't call it this. You've had thousands of days, thousands of hours of being wrong, but it's thousands of years, you think, of man being religious, believing in all sorts of extraterrestrial forces, supernatural powers, gods, religions. We've had thousands of years of that, and the mind is a fairly recent phenomenon, and we cannot put all of our neurons and eggs in one basket. We cannot be intellectual at the expense of our souls. Again, regardless of what it's being called. And I'm picking out the crudest terminology, the most direct of soul and mind, as people still use it. And they see it as being an inevitable conflict. But it's an inevitable conflict on the basis, if you remember, of playing with magnets. There used to be a little white and a black dog on magnets, and you put them head together. You've got the positive charges, and they'll pull away from each other, and they turn this way. That's the way people feel about their own nervous system. No matter what they call it, that is the way humanity feels about some sort of eternal struggle. And if they get just a little bit better than an Arkansas farmer, and it's a little past, it's a struggle between good and evil, it becomes a struggle between the intellect and the soul. Which am I going to do? Try and be a decent person? Am I going to try and fulfill my soul, feed my spirit? Or should I just go off and try to do my mind? Which is an easy guess if, indeed, you're an Arkansas farmer and you've never been to school. It's no real contest. No offense to Arkansas farmers. But it's no real contest. And yet it's still in everybody. Even people who went to Harvard. It's still there. They can be brought to their knees. You know that by now. A man who's professor of the philosophy department on tenure at Harvard, an atheist, vice president, or maybe even president now of the Massachusetts Society of Atheists. That son of a bitch's mother died, or he starts, pissing blood. The first thing you know, he's thinking, where's an Episcopal priest? The idea of a soul is no longer that foreign to him. It's not to pick on people, that's the way it is. They are never that far removed. An atheist is not that far removed from religion, not unless you're going to say that he cut off his head and got at least a few feet away from the base of his spine. Then he might say, hey, I don't believe in my spine. Of course, I know he meant to say, I don't believe in God. There is no quantum space between a man's soul and a man's mind except out at street level the way people think there is. And of course they think there is. Guess what? Well, you know what? There is. And I have wasted, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes going through something when it comes up to the point of me saying, well, it's, it's not that, and then having to admit, well, yeah, it is. Well, I, for one, I agree with the man over here. I wish Burt Bacharach was here so we could say, what's it all about, Alfie? And I'm sure Burt and Hal David say, well, by now the royalties, I would just guess it's about $1 million just off that. Well, see, it was a theme for a movie, so you get paid extra. It's more when movies than it is just 2 or 3 cents when the song was on the radio, but I don't go any further, we'll get threatening letters from BMI. Young persons, and Kyroot said, here we go, Jesus. Oh, that's the wrong page. Can you have faith in me trying to explain these Kyroots when I'm sitting right here and somebody requested page 7 and I'm sitting here looking at page 6 about to read it? I was going to say, how can you have faith in anybody doing that? And I decided not to ask you because I asked me, and I thought, well, hell, you can't. Just lucky for me that I can run on low octane. I don't have to. And Kyroot said, just before every cataclysmic flood, many people broke out in a small rash. I find it encouraging, for some reason, for the first one of each evening to be the one requested that is blatantly, patently self-explanatory. That somebody, obviously they understood it. If they had the wherewithal to request it, they just wanted to hear it again. And Kyroot said, a man not upset by change is not normal. And as many have suspected, an artist is not normal. The king gave them all a simple choice, either get normal or get shot. The people like simple choices. The people now. The people like being normal. The people don't like surprises and change. Now you get out of here with your old bad artistic self. That is the king, that is almost the ad hoc, the common denominator between what ordinary people think of being their soul and their mind. That's what some people still call it themselves. But the king has the ability to make such choices, except people who don't understand what's going on with their nervous system take the king to be what? I know, themselves. Yes, I decided to do that. When? Well, as soon as you asked me. I mean, but you decided to think that and do that yourself. Yes, I did. But you knew it. Oh, yes, I knew it. And how long had you known it? Well, as soon as you asked me. Maybe we should fix up some kind of access that I could have some kind of switch that would turn the tape or just jiggle it while you're so that sometimes I do something like that and hit it and it do a glitch to where people think, well, the tape got scrambled there. Maybe something was cut. Because I'm being silly. If I was going to get good, I'd get the end of something and do like 2 sentences stuck together like something been cut. But wait a minute. I've had several people write the show and I already think that when I was talking straightforward. Is there no way out? No. And Kyroot said, only a rebel can stab himself in the back on purpose. Another one's self-explanatory, which is easier for me to say when we're running out of time, isn't it? All right, here was, of course, there were 2 of these were connected and they were separated. Kind of a fancy-antsy, something Kyroot did tonight that normally when they're connected, they're back to back. But no. Page 27 and 29 is connected and 28 is just, anyway. And Kyroot said, the street corner orator declared, we're all smarter than we let on. And a passerby quit passing by long enough to ask, then why don't we just go ahead and let on? And the guy said, we ain't that smart. Page 27. A street corner orator declared, "We're all smarter than we let on." And a passerby asked, "Why don't we just go ahead and let on?" "Hey," said the guy, "we ain't that dumb." Huh? Just way you want it. We got 6 minutes. You want me to give 3 minutes to one, 3 minutes to the other? You're not that dumb. Why would Kyroot or anybody with any sort of, it's hard to say sense, do one that they're both the same thing except the punchline, one of them seems to be the antithesis of the other. That the guy says we're all smarter than we let on. Now if we had any sort of emin or minister, a rabbi or some great speaker, you could go on with that forever. We're all smarter than we let on. Religion has its hands on it. They look at it another way. They say, well, our souls are actually better. We're potentially better than we are. This guy just says we're all smarter than we let on, which kind of just cuts through, if you can follow, a good 3,000 years of religion. Just caught the morality in the sense of behaving well and paying your money into an organization. Forget all sense of behavior, morality, and decency and spirituality and take it into the higher end of the nervous system, wherein you should be by now, at least, somewhere up around the Great Lakes. The guy just says we're all smarter than we let on. Now see, religion would say things like we're all better people than we seem to be. Or if they really want to get philosophical and thoughtful, they'll say we used to be better and then we ran amok. But still the point is, they do it on the basis of morality, goodness, decency, something, although they do not use these terms, something to do with the limbic system rather than that going into the higher areas of the human brain. The frontal lobes. They're kind of still involved with the backer lobes. That we're all smarter than we let on. And a guy that was going by heard this, and you could do, if you want to follow your own religion, if it was back to religion, but this guy says, well, why don't we just go ahead and let on? Which if you really want to look at it another way, if you were back into the area of the soul, back down the nervous system, back down a kind of four-dimensional chronological slide of time where people were being more religious than they were intellectual, as they call it, then somebody could say we're all better than we are. And the guy going by would have stopped and said, well, in that case, why don't we just act better? Which you can't do that with religion, you can't do it with yourself, or else it all kind of goes poof like a real cheap balloon that you brought to a party. It had a funny looking part on the end anyway to start with. It was a real cheap balloon. There's a picture of a guy that looks like a Roman head, I don't know. But this guy says we're all smarter than we let on. That in some way we're smarter and there's something holding us back from actually manifesting it or doing it. And the guy going by says, well, why don't we just go ahead and let on? And the guy says, we ain't that smart. The other version, same thing, exact same thing, down to the end. The guy says we're all smarter than we let on. Again, keep in mind, the ordinary people, still the majority of humans on this planet, if they found any possible use for this, would want the version that had to do with apparently emotions, morality, behavior. They'd want it on the basis that we're all better people, we're all more spiritual, we're all more humane, we're all more decent than we generally act. Inside, we're all good people. And the guy's saying, well, why the hell don't we go ahead and be good then, if that's true? Keep that in mind. But the second version, the guy says, we're all smarter than we let on. And remember how the first version went. And the guy going by said, well, why don't we just go ahead and let on? And the guy says, hey, we ain't that dumb. Huh? Are we going to have the world's fastest wrap-up explanation, not just of this, but why man even needs symbolism, much less the dreaded metaphor? Nah, I ain't that dumb. Yeah. One minute there. And Kyroot said, sometimes When the afternoon was hot and the lemonade cool, this one man would sit on his patio, sip, and say to himself, you know, if you want to, you can just go ahead and forget about Greyhounds, Air France, British Airways, Italiana. They're still passing the human nervous system that you haven't traveled. And using that as a semi-pleasing segue, we will leave. And we hope to be back on the air. As you notice, we haven't been on the air for the last 3 shows that we've had because of, well, if you saw the beginning of the show, they gave the explanations. So I hope next time we're not on. But if we're not, there'll be an explanation before we're on that tells why we're not. They already showed.